Dear students, in this module we will discuss and learn about the measurement and scaling techniques through which you will be able to know the following aspects: measurement, its meaning, importance in research, levels and sources of measurement, techniques of developing measurement tools, scaling techniques, meaning and importance, and different scaling techniques and procedures to construct the same, and finally advantages and disadvantages of different scaling techniques, and meaning and importance of measurement. In social science research, measurement of variables plays an important role in pursuing research in a scientific manner with objectivity. Measurement in general is some sort of giving numerals to objects or events according to certain rules. Though it looks very simple, in reality it is a relatively complex and demanding task, especially when we are dealing with qualitative or abstract information. In the words of Kothari, by measurement we mean the process of assigning numbers to objects or observations, the level of measurement being a function of the rules under which the numbers are assigned. It is easy to assign numbers to some objects like weight, height, age, gender, income, financial assets, migration status, etc. But such task appears to be somewhat difficult in the case of things like caste, education status, occupational status, women's empowerment, domestic work, domestic violence, caregiving, etc. In the research process, measurement of variables is very much needed for statistical analysis, description and interpretation of the results in a scientific manner. Another aspect of the definition of measurement is the assignment of numbers, which will be done based on some rules of correspondence. The rule of correspondence is some form of scale which is based on the terms of this mathematical set theory. The levels of measurement generally is of 4 types, like nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale and ratio scale. In the case of nominal scale, among all scales of measurement, this is the simplest one. Here numbers or symbols are assigned to each subgroup or categories of a characteristic or property, which will be common to all classified within that subgroup. Generally, for qualitative variables such as gender, like male equals to 1 and female equals to 2, religion like Hindu 1, Muslim 2 and Christian 3, caste like scheduled caste 1, most backward caste 2, backward caste 3 and forward caste 4, etc. numbers respectively will be assigned. The assigned numbers will indicate that all those with the same number belong to that particular category. The persons or objects in each of the categories of these type of variables are exhaustive with only one attribute and are mutually exclusive. At times, such classification can be done on the basis of a particular trait or characteristic present or absent and possession or non-possession of certain property. But one cannot decide whether the persons or objects are higher or lower than the previous or later corresponding numbers of the same attribute characteristics. Likewise, one should not interpret that the same category of people or objects of one group are equal to the same people or objects in the other group. Mathematical operations are not possible except getting frequencies of counting individuals or items for each category besides percentages and mode. Chi-square test of significance can be also be computed since the data is categorical in nature. The next type of measurement scale is ordinal scale. In this type of measurement too, numerals or symbols are used by ranking the objects or characteristics or properties of variables. Hence, the scale will be ordered on some dimension, mostly qualitative variables, that is sometimes quantitative also, with some reasoning or justification. Thus, on the one side, the objects measured under one category are mutually exclusive and have only one characteristic in comparison to other such categories, and it also indicates the relevant position, that is lower or higher in relation to two or more categories of the same object of characteristic. For example, take the example of economic status, which is categorized as poorest, poor, middle, rich and richest, and assigned with the numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 respectively. Here, a score of 5, which is higher in terms of economic status compared to all the other 4 groups under consideration, and the other way, poorest has given a score of 1, which is the lowest in economic status compared to all the other economic status groups under consideration. Hence, we can say that poorest is lesser than poor, and which is lesser than middle, again which is lesser than richer and richest, or the other way, richest is highest compared to rich, which who are compared to middle, richer than middle, and who are higher than the poor, and who are higher than the poorest. So, of course, for this type of measurement, some research support is needed. Other examples for ordinal scale are attitudes, opinions, social class, caste, standard of living, etc. This scale would not provide information how much more or less of the categories the items possesses. This scale also has no absolute values, and the real difference between adjacent ranks is not equal. Percentages, mode and median may be used here, but not mean, since they are not absolute values. One can use the non-parametric tests as measures of statistical significance. Next, we will move upon to interval scale. In the case of interval scale, numbers are used to rank items such that numerically equal distances on the scale represent equal distance in the property being measured. However, the major limitation this scale is not having an absolute 0, and thereby it does not have the capacity to measure the complete absence of a trait or characteristics. The Fahrenheit scale is the best example for this type of scale. In this scale, one can interpret that an increase in temperature from 30 degrees centigrade to 40 degrees involves the same increase in temperature as an increase from 60 degrees centigrade to 70 degrees centigrade. But one cannot say that the temperature of 60 degrees is twice as warm as the temperature of 30 degrees. This is because both numbers are dependent on the fact that the 0 on the scale set is arbitrary at the temperature on the freezing point of water. Therefore, the ratio of the two temperatures 30 degrees and 60 degrees means nothing, because 0 is an arbitrary point. Another example for this type of scale is the scores given for items in measurement, the Likert scale, which we are discussing in the next section. In this scale, as the intervals are equal on some rule, means standard deviations and correlations may be computed on this type of scale. Besides, the statistical significant tests such as the t-test and the f-test, as well as most of the multivariate techniques also can be done. The next fourth type of measurement scale is ratio scale. These scales will have an absolute or true 0 for measurement, and they possess all the other characteristics of the scales mentioned earlier. That is, with ratio scales one can compare intervals, rank objects, or use the numerals to identify the objects. Among the 4 scales of measurement, this is the most superior one. Here A true zero means that the object measuring 0 possesses none of the properties in question. Height and weight are the best examples for this type of scale. In these examples, 0 means no height or no weight at all. Likewise, a person of 100 kilos can be said to be twice as heavy as the person whose weight is 50 kilograms. All mathematical operations as well as statistical measures, including inferential statistics, can be applied to these scales. In most scientific research work, these types of scales are preferred, but in social science research, these scales are used in a limited way. Now, having discussed the scales of measurement, we will move upon to the sources of errors in measurement. Generally, in research work, measurement should be precise and unambiguous, but it is really difficult to achieve because one or the other errors are likely to crop up, especially in the case of social science research. Some of the major sources of errors in measurement are respondent, situation, measurer or interviewer and instrument. We will discuss a few words about all these things. From respondent side, while providing information, at times respondents may not be reluctant to express strong negative feelings, or it is also possible that he or she may have little knowledge about the question being asked, but may not admit so. This will result in the respondent providing information based on guesses. Moreover, due to factors such as fatigue, boredom, anxiety, etc., respondents may not provide information accurately or in detail. Secondly, from situation side, sometimes situational factors such as someone present during the interview, differential social standing of the interviewer and respondents, misunderstanding of questions, noise at the places of interview, etc., may strain the interview, which may have serious effects on the rapport between the respondent and interviewer. At this point of time, if the respondent feels that anonymity is not assured, he or she may give false information. Thirdly, the measurer or interviewer side also errors may likely to crop up. At times, the interviewer can misinterpret responses by rewording and reordering questions. His or her behavior, style and looks may encourage or discourage certain replies from the respondents. Error may also crop up because of incorrect coding, faulty tabulation and statistical analysis of data due to lack of knowledge. The fourth type of errors likely to arise from instrument side. Errors in measurement are likely to arise because of faulty instrument used in data collection. Use of complex words which are not possible to understand by the respondents, confusing meanings of his words, poor printing, inadequate space for filling the responses, choices, omissions, etc., are some things that make use the measuring instrument defective and thereby result in errors. Now, how to avoid this measurement? Now, we will move upon topic of techniques of developing measurement tools. As measurement tools play a crucial role in cropping up errors in measurement, the researcher should develop the measurement tool in a proper fashion, for which certain techniques are mentioned here. For example, like concept development, specification of concept dimensions, selection of indicators, formation of an index. We will discuss a few words about each of them. Firstly, concept development. The researcher should clearly understand the major concepts that are going to be used in the research work to be undertaken, and he or she should have thorough knowledge about the field of research. The researcher also should be able to define the concepts operationally. Secondly, specification of concept dimensions. The researcher should also be able to understand clearly the various dimensions and or components of the concepts. These dimensions should also be defined in a clear cut manner. Thirdly, selection of indicators. The researcher must be able to develop appropriate indicators through which the minor elements of dimensions related to the concepts can be measured. The indicators may be in terms of specific questions, statements of terms through which the respondents' knowledge, attitudes, opinions, etc. can be obtained. These should be clearly focused to obtain the relevant information as needed to measure the dimensions and or concepts to be measured. Fourthly, formation of an index. In social science research, it used to be the general practice to form an index for some concepts based on the information gathered through indicators or items. This process is essential to present and interpret the concept as a single index when we have several dimensions or indicators to measure one concept. For this, researchers generally assign score to the responses of each indicator pertaining to different dimensions of a concept and then sum up the scores for each respondent. Through such index, that is summation of scores, one can interpret how each respondent behaves or stands relative to other respondents in the index under consideration. In population studies, the socio-economic index, standard of living index, wealth index, women's empowerment index, etc. are some of the examples for these type of indexes. In addition to the above aspects of measurement, researchers should also know about tests of sound measurement comprising of validity, reliability and practicality. These are discussed in detail in the module on validity and reliability next. Now, we will move upon the next topic, scaling of techniques for its meaning and importance. In social and behavioral science research, it is quite common to collect information on the knowledge, attitudes and opinions of people towards various conditions, issues, situations, policies, problems and or concerns to the respondents of the study. For this purpose, researchers assign numbers to various degrees based on certain rules or guidelines which is shown as the scaling techniques. These will help us to understand how different people hold their views on different issues and situations in terms of numbers. Through these numbers and summation of these scores for each respondent as detailed in the case of index earlier, the researchers will be able to analyze and interpret the same in terms of findings. But developing an appropriate tool to measure the attitudes or opinions of respondents is not an easy task, and thereby different scaling techniques or approaches have been developed. Of these, three such things are going to be discussed in the following lines. The first one is arbitrary approach. These types of scales are developed on an ad hoc basis and are designed mostly through the researcher's own subjective selection of items. The researcher first collects few statements or items which he or she believes are appropriate to a given topic, that is a concept. Some of these are selected for inclusion in the measuring instrument, and then a few persons are asked to check in a list the statements with which they agree. On the merits front, developing these scales is very easy, fast and less expensive. They can also be designed to be highly specific and adequate. Because of these benefits, such scales are widely used in practice. Limitations wise, firstly, we do not have an objective evidence that such scales measure the concepts for which they have been developed. These scales are mostly rely on researchers' insight and competence. The second type of scales are coined as summated scales or Likert type scales. These scales are developed by utilizing the item analysis approach, wherein a particular item is evaluated on the basis of how well it distinguishes between those persons whose total score is high and those whose total score is low. Those items are statements that best meet this sort of discrimination test are included in the final statement. As Likert devised this sort of summated scales in measuring social attitudes, these scales are popularly known as Likert type scales. In these scales, the respondent is asked to respond to each of the respondents in terms of several degrees, usually 5 degrees, but at times 3 or 7 times also. The 5 degrees of agreement or disagreement, such as strongly agree, agree, undecided, disagree and strongly disagree. So, here 5 degree of measurement is taken into consideration. For each statement, at one extreme of the scale there is a strong agreement with the given statement, and at the other strong disagreement, and between them the intermediate points. Each point, that is response on the scale, carries a score. If the scores are on favorable degree pattern, the least score of 1 is given to the least favorable degree response, and the highest score of 5 is given to most favorable degree response. Similarly, negative scores also can be given from 5 to 1 if responses are from least unfavorable to most unfavorable. These scoring patterns, either positive or negative, are followed for all the statements in the instruments. Then, for each of the respondents, the scores will be pooled together and the total score obtained, which will indicate the respondent's favorableness or unfavorableness towards the given point of view. Then now we will move how we will construct the Likert scale. There are 5 steps are there, of which first one is, firstly, the researcher collects large number of statements which are relevant to the attitude being studied. Here one should take care that each statement expresses definite favorableness of or unfavorableness to a particular point of view on the attitude of study, and the number of favorable and unfavorable statements is approximately equal. Secondly, with the gathered statements, a trial test should be administered to a small group of persons from those who are going to be studied finally. These persons will be asked to indicate their responses to each statement by checking one of the categories of agreement or disagreement using a 5-point scale as mentioned above. Thirdly, the responses to various statements are scored in such a way that a response indicating the most favorable attitude is given the high score of 5, and that with the most unfavorable attitude is given the lowest score of 1. Likewise, the reverse pattern should be followed for negative responses. Fourthly, the total score of each respondent should be obtained by adding scores that he or she received for each of the statements, that is, both the scores of assigned for negative as well as positive statements have to be done like this. And fifthly, these scores have to be arranged in such a way so as to find out those statements which have high discriminatory power. For this purpose, the researcher generally selects some part of the highest and the lowest total scores, say for example top 25% and the bottom 25%. These two extremes groups are interpreted to represent the most favorable and the least favorable attitudes and thereby used as criterion groups by which to evaluate individual statements. This way, the researcher determines which statements consistently correlates with low favorability and which with high favorability. And finally, only those statements that correlate with the total score should be remained in the final instrument and all other must be discarded from it. So, what are the advantages of Likert scale? It is relatively easy to construct, takes less time to construct, more reliable since the respondents answer each statement included in the instrument. Each statement of this scale is given an equal test for discriminating ability and thereby it permits the use of statements and are not directly related to the attitude being studied, and these scales can easily be used in respondent centered and stimulus centered studies. About the limitations of Likert scale are, based on this scale one can interpret that the respondents are more or less favorable to a topic, but it is not possible to say how much more or less they are. One cannot assure that the 5 positions and their scores indicated on the scale are equally spaced, which means that it is equivalent to the ordinal scale. The total score of an individual respondent has little clear meaning, given that the total score can be secured by a variety of answer patterns. One cannot assume that the respondent can validly react for a short statement on a printed form in the absence of a real life qualifying situation. Now, we will move to differential scales, which are popularly known as Thurston scales. These scales are known as the consensus scale approach developed by Thurston. In this approach, the selection of items is made by a panel of judges who evaluate the items in terms of whether they are relevant to the topic area and unambiguous in implication. For the procedure for constructing of Thurston scale we will discuss. Firstly, the researcher gathers a large number of statements, usually 20 or more, which express various points of view toward a group, institution, idea or practice, that is statements belonging to the topic area. Secondly, these statements are then submitted to a panel of judges who are experts in the field of attitudes, and then each of them arranges them in 11 groups or piles ranging from one extreme to another in position, some sort of 11-point scale in ascending order from most unfavorable to the issue to most favorable. Thirdly, this sorting by each judge yields a composite position for each of them for each of the items. In case of marked disagreement between the judges in assigning a position to an item, that item is discarded. Next, for the items retained by each judge, the median value is computed for each statement. Finally, the statements whose median scores are evenly from one extreme to the other will be the statements so selected and constitute the final scale to administered to the respondents. After developing the scale as stated above, The respondents are asked to check the statements with each they agree. The median value of the respondents that they check is worked out, and this establishes their score or quantifies their opinion or attitudes. It may be noted that when the final instrument is made, the statements are rearranged in random order of social value. These scales are mostly used to measure attitude towards issues like war, religion, etc. The advantages side, most reliable, Thurston scale is most reliable since a expert's role is there in constructing this scale. It is easy to administer and score. Generally, it takes little time and energy on the part of either the researcher or client. Coming to the limitations of Thurston scale, firstly, higher cost and a lot of efforts are needed to construct the scale. Secondly, the values assigned mostly represent the judge's own ideas. Thirdly, some sort of subjectivity will be there, not fully objective. And finally, the scale may not exactly allow the respondents' feelings, rather than the scales allow them only to agree and disagree with particular statements. Well, in this module, a detailed discussion is made about the measurement and scaling techniques, highlighting the following aspects like measurement, meaning and its importance in research, levels, sources and techniques of measurement tools, meaning, importance and precautions, procedures to develop different scaling techniques with a special reference to Likert and Thurston scales, advantages and disadvantages of different scaling techniques. Hope by understanding these aspects, one would be able to apply these to their research, through which his or her research will become more quality in nature. Thank you.